Sarah Martinez had always been strong. Growing up as the daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs, she learned early that life doesn't give you what you want. It gives you what you fight for. When she married Marine Sergeant David Martinez 5 years ago, she knew the risks that came with loving a man who served his country. What she never expected was that the real battle would begin not on some distant battlefield, but in their own backyard. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. Sarah was reviewing patient files at the Veterans Hospital, where she worked as a physical therapist when her phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. But the words hit her like a freight train. David's convoy had hit an improvised explosive device outside Kandahar. He was alive, but barely. Traumatic brain injury, multiple fractures, internal bleeding, the list went on and on. Within hours, Sarah was on a plane to Germany, where David had been airlifted to a military medical facility. When she first saw him lying in that hospital bed, connected to more machines than she could count, she made a promise. She would do whatever it took to bring her husband back. Not just his body, but his mind, his spirit, everything that made David the man who could make her laugh until her sides hurt, and who still left little love notes in her lunchbox after 5 years of marriage. The doctors were cautious with their optimism. "Brain injuries are unpredictable," they told her. "We'll know more as time goes on." But Sarah wasn't content to wait and see. She researched every treatment option, contacted specialists across the country, and learned everything she could about traumatic brain injury recovery. When David was stable enough to be transferred back to the United States, Sarah made sure he went to the best facility possible, even if it meant using their entire savings and taking out loans. The months that followed tested every fiber of Sarah's being. David's recovery was slow and frustrating. Some days he didn't recognize her. Other days he would fly into rages, confused and frightened by his own damaged mind. The man who had once been a disciplined Marine struggled to remember basic things, like how to tie his shoes or what day it was. Sarah watched helplessly as the love of her life became trapped in his own head, fighting a war against an enemy he couldn't see or understand. Sarah refused to give up. She took a leave of absence from her job to care for David full-time. Every morning at 6, she would help him with his physical therapy exercises. She worked with speech therapists to help him regain his communication skills. She researched experimental treatments and drove him to appointments with specialists in 3 different states. When David became frustrated and wanted to quit, Sarah pushed him forward. When he had nightmares that left him screaming in the middle of the night, Sarah held him until the terror passed. Months turned into a year, and then 2 years. Sarah's friends and family begged her to consider placing David in a long-term care facility. "You're killing yourself," her sister told her during one of their increasingly rare phone calls. "You've lost 30 pounds, you never sleep, and you look like you're 10 years older." But Sarah couldn't hear it. Every small improvement David made. The first time he remembered their wedding anniversary, the day he managed to walk to the mailbox by himself, the moment he looked at her with clear recognition and said, "I love you," without prompting. These victories kept her going. The financial strain was overwhelming. Sarah had depleted their savings, maxed out credit cards, and taken out a second mortgage on their home. She worked part-time jobs in the evenings when David was sleeping, cleaning offices and doing data entry work from home. She sold her car and took the bus everywhere. She cut out every unnecessary expense, living on rice and beans while making sure David had the nutrition he needed for healing. The stress was eating her alive, but she told herself it was temporary. David was getting better, slowly but surely. By the 3rd year, David had made remarkable progress. He could hold conversations, though sometimes he struggled to find the right words. He could walk with a cane and had regained much of his motor function. He was starting to remember more about their life together. The doctors called his recovery miraculous, and Sarah knew it was because she had never stopped fighting for him. But the cost had been enormous. Sarah's health was failing. She had developed chronic migraines from stress and lack of sleep. Her blood pressure was dangerously high. She had frequent dizzy spells and had fainted twice in the previous month. On a cold February morning, Sarah was helping David with his morning routine when the world suddenly tilted sideways. She felt a sharp pain in her chest, and her vision went black. The last thing she remembered was David calling her name, his voice filled with a clarity and panic she hadn't heard in years. Sarah woke up in a hospital bed, disoriented and weak. A doctor was checking her chart, and David was sitting in a chair beside her bed, holding her hand. His eyes were clear and focused in a way they hadn't been since before the accident. "You collapsed," he said quietly. "Your heart stopped for almost a minute. The doctors said you've been running on empty for years." The diagnosis was severe exhaustion complicated by malnutrition and stress-induced cardiomyopathy. Her heart muscle had been weakened by years of chronic stress and inadequate self-care. The doctor told David that Sarah needed complete bed rest for at least a month, followed by a long period of recovery. "She's been taking care of everyone but herself," the doctor explained. "Her body just couldn't take it anymore." As Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness over the next few days, David did something he hadn't been able to do since his injury. He took charge. Despite his ongoing struggles with memory and processing, he remembered the phone numbers of Sarah's friends and family. He called her sister, her parents, her former colleagues at the Veterans Hospital. Word spread quickly through the military community about what Sarah had done for her husband, how she had sacrificed everything to nurse him back to health, and how she had nearly died from the effort. What happened next surprised everyone, including David and Sarah's family. The story of Sarah's dedication spread through military networks faster than wildfire. Marines from David's old unit started calling, then Marines from other units, then Marines from other bases. The story resonated with thousands of military families who understood the sacrifices that wives and husbands make for their wounded warriors. Sarah had become a symbol of something they all recognized: the quiet heroism of military spouses who fight their own battles on the home front. Major General Patricia Williams, commanding officer of Camp Pendleton, heard Sarah's story during a briefing about wounded warrior family support programs. She was moved by the account of a woman who had given everything for her Marine husband and decided that Sarah's sacrifice deserved recognition. What started as a plan for a small ceremony grew into something much larger as word spread throughout the Marine Corps community. When Sarah was finally alert enough to understand what was happening around her, David told her about the phone calls and messages that had been pouring in. Marines from across the country had heard her story. Many had similar experiences with their own families. They wanted to honor her, David explained, though he was vague about the details because the organizers had asked him to keep it a surprise. 2 weeks after her collapse, Sarah was strong enough to be discharged from the hospital, though she still needed a wheelchair and had strict orders to limit her activity. David had arranged for her sister to stay with them to help with Sarah's care, a role reversal that wasn't lost on either of them. "It's my turn to take care of you," David told her, and for the first time in years, Sarah allowed herself to lean on someone else. The surprise came on a Saturday morning in March, exactly 3 years after David's injury. Sarah was resting in their living room when David told her they needed to go somewhere. "It's important," he said, helping her into the wheelchair. Sarah was too tired to argue, though she wondered why David seemed nervous and excited at the same time. David drove them to Camp Pendleton, the Marine base about an hour from their home. Sarah had been there before for various military events, but something felt different today. There were more cars than usual, and David seemed to know exactly where he was going. He pushed her wheelchair toward a large field that was typically used for ceremonies and training exercises. As they approached the field, Sarah could see that something major was happening. There were rows and rows of Marines in dress uniforms standing at attention. Flags were flying, and a small stage had been set up with microphones and speakers. Sarah's heart started racing, and she grabbed David's hand. "What is this?" she asked, but David just smiled and kept pushing her toward the field. When they reached the edge of the ceremony area, Sarah gasped. There were more Marines than she had ever seen in one place. Row after row of men and women in crisp dress blues, standing perfectly still under the California sun. A Marine officer approached them and saluted David, then knelt down beside Sarah's wheelchair. "Mrs. Martinez," he said formally, "on behalf of the United States Marine Corps, we would like to thank you for your service." Sarah looked around in confusion. She had never served in the military. "I think there's been a mistake," she began, but the officer held up his hand. "No mistake, ma'am. Your service to Marine Sergeant David Martinez and your sacrifice for our Corps family has not gone unnoticed. Today, 1,100 Marines from bases across Southern California have come to honor you." As he spoke, Sarah could see that the field was indeed filled with Marines. They stood in perfect formation, their faces serious and respectful. Sarah felt tears starting to fall as the reality of what was happening hit her. These Marines, all of them, had come here for her. Major General Williams stepped up to the microphone and began to speak. Her voice carried across the field as she told Sarah's story. She spoke about dedication that goes beyond duty, about love that sacrifices everything, about the hidden heroes who fight their battles far from any battlefield. "Sarah Martinez represents the very best of our Marine Corps family," the general said. "For 3 years she has demonstrated the same courage, determination, and unwavering commitment to her mission that we expect from our finest Marines. She never wore the uniform, but she embodied everything the uniform represents. Today we honor her service and sacrifice." As the general spoke, Sarah looked out at the sea of Marines standing before her. She could see their faces now, and many of them were emotional. These weren't just strangers in uniforms. They were people who understood what it meant to serve, what it meant to sacrifice, what it meant to never give up on a fellow Marine. They saw in Sarah's story their own families, their own struggles, their own quiet heroism. The ceremony continued with presentations and speeches from various Marine Corps officials. Sarah was presented with a special recognition medal and a certificate signed by the Commandant of the Marine Corps. But what moved her most was what happened next. One by one, Marines from the formation began to step forward. They approached Sarah's wheelchair, saluted her, and shook her hand. Many of them shared brief stories about their own families, about wounded Marines they had known, about the wives and husbands who had stood by them through impossible times. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, who had served with David in Afghanistan, was among those who approached her. "I was there the day David got hurt," he told Sarah quietly. "I've been following his recovery, and I know what you did. What we all know is that you didn't just save David, you showed all of us what real strength looks like." His eyes were bright with tears as he saluted her. Another Marine, Corporal Jennifer Walsh, told Sarah about her own husband's struggle with PTSD after his deployment. "I heard your story, and it gave me strength to keep going," she said. "I wanted to be here today to thank you for showing me that it's okay to fight for the people we love, even when it's hard." The parade of Marines continued for over an hour. Each one took a moment to acknowledge Sarah's sacrifice and to thank her for her service to their Corps family. Many shared their own stories of struggle and perseverance. Some had been wounded themselves and spoke about the families who had seen them through their darkest times. Others talked about the strength they drew from knowing that their own families would stand by them no matter what. As the individual recognitions continued, Sarah realized that this ceremony wasn't just about her. It was about all of the families who make sacrifices for the Marine Corps, all of the spouses who give everything for their warriors, All of the quiet heroes who fight their battles in hospital rooms and therapy sessions and late-night vigils. She had become a symbol for something much larger than her individual story. Near the end of the ceremony, David stood up from his chair beside Sarah's wheelchair. His movement was still careful and deliberate, but he stood straight and proud as he addressed the assembled Marines. 3 years ago, I was lost, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the field. I didn't know who I was, where I was, or even who my wife was half the time. Sarah could have walked away. No one would have blamed her. Instead, she fought for me every single day. She brought me back from a place I didn't think I could return from. David's voice grew stronger as he continued. Today, you're honoring my wife, and she deserves every bit of recognition you're giving her. But I want you to know that Sarah didn't just save me. She saved my family, my future, my hope. She showed me what it means to never leave a Marine behind, even when that Marine is broken and lost and angry at the world. Sarah is the strongest Marine I've ever known, even though she never wore the uniform. When David finished speaking, something extraordinary happened. Without any command or signal, all 1,100 Marines began to applaud. The sound was thunderous, rolling across the field like a wave. They applauded not just for Sarah, but for David's recovery, for their reunion, for the power of love and determination to overcome seemingly impossible odds. The applause continued for several minutes, and many of the Marines were openly crying. As the ceremony concluded, Sarah felt overwhelmed by gratitude and emotion. She had spent 3 years focused entirely on David's recovery, never thinking about her own needs or recognition. To discover that her story had touched so many people, that her struggles had meaning beyond her own family, was almost too much to process. These Marines understood something that many people didn't, that serving your country isn't just about wearing a uniform and carrying a weapon. Sometimes it means holding a family together when everything is falling apart. Sometimes it means sacrificing your own health and well-being for someone you love. Sometimes it means fighting a different kind of war on a different kind of battlefield. The formal ceremony ended with the Marines returning to formation and marching off the field, but many lingered afterward to continue speaking with Sarah and David. Families of wounded warriors approached to share their own experiences and to thank Sarah for giving them hope. Active-duty Marines talked about how Sarah's story would inspire them to be better husbands and fathers, knowing the kind of strength their families might need to show if they were ever injured. Major General Williams approached Sarah as the crowd was dispersing. "Mrs. Martinez," she said, "I hope you understand the impact your story has had on our Marines and their families. Your example of dedication and sacrifice embodies the best of what we stand for. I want you to know that the Marine Corps family will always be here for you and David, just as you were there for him." As David wheeled Sarah back to their car, she felt a profound sense of peace that had been missing for 3 years. The recognition was meaningful, but more important was the realization that her sacrifice had not been in vain. David was getting stronger every day, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. Their marriage had survived the worst possible test. And now she knew that their story had given hope and strength to other families facing similar challenges. The drive home was quiet, both Sarah and David processing what had just happened. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. David smiled, a full, genuine smile that reminded Sarah of the man she had married. "I started making calls as soon as I was clear-headed enough to remember phone numbers," he admitted. "I needed to do something to honor what you did for me. I needed the whole world to know what kind of woman I married." In the weeks that followed the ceremony, Sarah's story continued to spread. Military publications wrote articles about her dedication. Veterans organizations invited her to speak at events. She received letters from military spouses around the world who shared their own stories of struggle and perseverance. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah began to take care of herself again. The ceremony had forced her to recognize that her own health and well-being mattered, not just to her, but to David and to the larger Marine Corps community that had adopted her as one of their own. David continued his recovery with renewed determination, inspired not just by Sarah's sacrifice, but by the recognition that their story mattered to others. He began speaking at Wounded Warrior events, sharing his experience and encouraging other injured Marines not to give up hope. He returned to part-time work and eventually became a counselor for other Marines dealing with traumatic brain injuries. Sarah returned to her work at the Veterans Hospital, but with a new perspective. She understood now that her role as a caregiver and advocate was itself a form of service. She began leading support groups for military spouses dealing with wounded warriors. She helped other families navigate the complex world of military medicine and benefits. She became a living example that love and determination can overcome even the most devastating challenges. The story of Sarah Martinez and the 1,100 Marines who honored her became legendary within the military community. It was shared at training sessions about family support, told to new Marine recruits learning about core values, and referenced in speeches about the true meaning of service. But for Sarah, the most important outcome was much simpler. She had her husband back, she had her health restored, and she knew that their love story had given hope to countless other families facing their own battles. Years later, when people asked Sarah about that day when she opened her eyes to see 1,100 Marines standing in her honor, she would always say the same thing. "I never set out to be a hero. I was just a wife who couldn't give up on her husband. But I learned that sometimes the most ordinary acts of love can become extraordinary when they inspire others to believe in the power of never leaving anyone behind."